Hormones can be generally classified as either water-soluble or lipid-soluble. This one distinction can tell you a lot about how that hormone will behave. Water-soluble hormones dissolve in water, while lipid-soluble hormones dissolve in lipids, or fats. Solubility, or a molecule's ability to dissolve, has a lot to do with the electrons found within that molecule. Electron density maps use a spectrum of colors to illustrate where the most electrons are found in a molecule. Red indicates a high density of electrons, making that region of the molecule more negative. Blue indicates low density of electrons, making that region more positive. And green indicates neutral regions. The chemical formula of water is H2O, which means it's made up of 1 oxygen and 2 hydrogens. Oxygen pulls electrons more strongly, and hydrogens pull electrons more weakly. Therefore, the oxygen side of the molecule is more negative, and the hydrogen side is more positive. This type of unequal sharing of electrons is characteristic of a polar bond or molecule. There are many different lipids with different chemical formulas, but what they have in common is that they evenly distribute electrons throughout the molecule, so there is a more uniform neutral charge. This type of equal sharing of electrons is characteristic of a nonpolar bond or molecule. Since water is a polar molecule, only other polar molecules will be able to dissolve in it. So water-soluble molecules have polar bonds. Since lipids are nonpolar, only other nonpolar molecules will be able to dissolve in it. So lipid-soluble molecules have nonpolar bonds. Because amino groups have polar bonds, most hormones made of amino acids are polar. Amino acids bind together to form peptides and proteins, therefore amine hormones, peptide hormones, and protein hormones are all usually water-soluble. Note this is the general rule, but there are rare exceptions. For example, thyroid hormones are derived from amino acids, but they happen to be lipid-soluble. Steroid hormones are a group of hormones that are built from cholesterol, a nonpolar molecule. Therefore, steroid hormones like testosterone and estrogen are lipid-soluble. Insulin is a protein hormone. It's synthesized by beta cells in the pancreas by transcribing and translating the insulin gene. Water-soluble hormones like insulin are made and then stored in the endocrine cell. It's only secreted once that hormone is needed. High blood glucose levels is the stimulus that triggers the release of insulin. Since blood is made mostly of water, and insulin can dissolve in water, it's able to freely travel through the blood. Insulin targets fat cells, muscle cells, liver cells, and many more by binding to its receptor, which is found on the surface of those target cells. This is because the plasma membrane has a lipid barrier. Insulin is water-soluble, not lipid-soluble, so it cannot pass through the barrier to enter the cell. Binding to this receptor activates a response in the target cell. The effect of water-soluble hormones often occurs in the cytosol. Insulin activates the target cell to move glucose transporters from the cytosol to the plasma membrane. This transporter allows glucose to enter the cell. Testosterone is a steroid hormone. It is synthesized in the testes by Leydig cells. Steroid hormones are made by using a series of enzymes to convert cholesterol into the desired steroid hormone. Lipid-soluble hormones like testosterone are made only when needed. As soon as steroid hormones are made, they simply diffuse out of the cell. This is because steroid hormones are lipid-soluble, which allows them to pass through the lipid barrier of the plasma membrane. Steroid hormones dissolve in lipids, not water. Since blood is made mostly of water, steroids cannot easily dissolve and travel through the blood. Instead, they use carrier proteins to smuggle them through the blood. Just like how steroids can simply diffuse out of the endocrine cell where it was made, steroids can also slip past the plasma membrane into other cells. They can move into and out of cells until they bind to their receptor, which is found inside the target cell. Testosterone has many targets, including hair follicles, skeletal muscle, voice box, etc. This hormone receptor complex can then enter the nucleus of the target cell, where it activates changes in the nucleus. It interacts with the DNA to turn certain genes on or off. To summarize the different physiology of water and lipid-soluble hormones, endocrine cells can make water-soluble hormones in advance and then store them until they're needed. Lipid-soluble hormones are made only when they're needed because they immediately diffuse out of the cell. Water-soluble hormones travel freely in the blood, while lipid-soluble hormones require carrier proteins to be able to dissolve in the blood. Receptors for water-soluble hormones are on target cells, while receptors for lipid-soluble hormones are found inside their target cells. And water-soluble hormones often have faster effects because they often involve quick reactions in the cytosol. Lipid-soluble hormones often have slower effects because they interact with the DNA to change gene expression. If the hormone turns on a gene, it'll take some time for that gene to be transcribed and translated.